Good afternoon. My name is Pamela Carpio, and I'm Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym, the GSSB, held on 29 November 2018. This virtual meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB webpage, along with high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. Present from the GRI Secretariat today are Bastian Bach, Director Standards Division, Mia Dademar, Manager Standards Division, Madere Olivar, Senior Manager Sectors Standards Division, and Karen Williams, Senior Coordinator Sector Standards Division. We will now start with a roll call. Mr. Dwight Justice. We will come back to...
Here, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Dwight.
No, I'm here.
Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Mr. Evan Harvey.
Here, present.
Thank you. Miss Julia Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Ken Swift.
Present.
Thank you. Miss Kirsten Machete Ovi.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Michel Washer.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Miss Robin Leeson.
Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Mr. Tony Moe.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Mr. Vincent Kong. I think Mr. Kong is on the line. He is signaling through chat box that he is present. Thank you. Mr. Nankumar Vadakapat.
I am present.
Thank you very
I am
much.
unfortunately not able to get the number for from where I can dial and the local Sri Lankan number.
Okay. Thank you. We will attend to that in
So
due
I
time.
will join back in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Judy Kuzeski, GSSB Chair.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Thank you, everyone. GSSB members, Jürgen Buxbaum, as well as Sulema Pioli, sent their apologies. And I will now hand to the chair of the GSSB, Judy Kuzeski, to open the meeting.
Thank you very much, Pamela, and thank you and welcome to all of the GSSB members and any of our stakeholders who might be listening in. Apologies for the slightly late start of this meeting due to some technical issues with the joining process. Hopefully, this won't be too disruptive for the remainder of the meeting. Can I ask you to turn to the agenda, please, if that's all right? So we'll just have a quick look at our agenda for today, which is we do have a full meeting. We have a number of things to accomplish and documents to look at and to approve. Just looking at the agenda, the first will be our summary of the 25th, 26th September in-person meeting. We'll then look at the exposure draft, the draft that has been forwarded to the GSSB of the proposed contents on tax and payment to governments, which we will discuss with respect to publishing these for public comment. We'll then look at the sector program description and the pilot proposal for the sector program mining sector project as one. Following that, we will be joined by Helena Barton, who is the chair of the Independent Appointments Committee, and she will talk us through the IAC's recent conclusion to their meeting and the implications for the GSSB, for the membership of the GSSB. And then we'll look at the proposal for the draft meeting dates for 2019 for a little bit of feedback. Any other business? I have not been advised that anyone has raised any issues under any other business, but if anyone has them, we'll have a few minutes for that at the end. And then we'll have a short private update just for information for the GSSB at the close of the meeting. Are there any questions about the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Can I ask you to go to your item 1, which is the draft summary of our in-person meeting? And can I ask if there's any discussion of this document, any questions or edits that need to be shared with the group before we sign off on this? Pamela, just for your information, I cannot see the chat box today. So if someone can let me know if anyone is raising their hand virtually, then that would be appreciated.
Perfect. We will do that.
Yeah. Any discussion of the
Judy,
meeting summary? Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Robin has a question. Robin,
please go ahead.
Yes, I just had a question, line 39 to 41, about the on the human rights update. I think it says that there's a proposal in time for this meeting, or is that being scheduled for the next meeting?
This is Bastian. Hello, everyone. We are indeed pushing that to the first meeting of the coming year.
Okay.
We were not able to put this together in time because the discussions of the Human Rights Committee are still going on, and we want to fully reflect the recommendations that they are making in our proposal for the review of the universal standards.
Okay, thank you.
Any other points that anyone would like clarification of or questions? Okay, hearing none, I think we can agree that this is now approved, and that will be posted on the GSSB website. Thank you very much. Moving on, we need to talk about the item number 2. This is the Technical Committee on tax and payments to government. Bastian, would you like to start the discussion here, please?
Yes, and I will be joined by Mia for this session,
yes.
Who will present the detail. Just as a intro to this session, we are building here today on the discussion we had with you in September at the in-person meeting. And importantly, we're building also on subsequent discussions that the technical committee had to address the feedback that you've been sharing at the in-person meeting. This is, as Judy has pointed out, the stage in the process for this project where we have a recommendation from the technical committee for a draft for public comment. And an exposure draft, and it is indeed the idea today to hear whether the GSSB members are comfortable to approve this for public comment. That is the item that we're presenting now. Mia will present an update, connect us back to the discussion that we last had in September on this, and an overview of the item that we're presenting today. And then we will have a chance to discuss this in more detail.
Thank you, Bastian. Thank you, Judy. Okay, so as was mentioned in this session, we are going to present an overview of the most significant changes that have been made to the draft standard by the Technical Committee in response to GSSB and indeed other stakeholder feedback since we last spoke in September. Then we will move into an opportunity to discuss any further comments, questions or concerns from GSSB members, and then we will look to seek the GSSB's approval to publish the draft for public comment. So as a quick reminder, as you remember, the objective of this project is to develop new, specific disclosures related to tax and payments to governments, which will be considered for incorporation into the GRI standards. The Technical Committee has met 8 times since January this year, including 2 times to consider feedback collected from stakeholders during the field test, which was presented to you in the September meeting, and feedback from the GSSB that was provided to us during the in-person meeting in September. Significant changes have been made to the draft standard in response to this feedback, in particular to the reporting requirements of Disclosure 5, and the Technical Committee has confirmed they are of the opinion that the standard is ready for public exposure. So to move to an overview of some of the core discussions and core items of feedback, the Technical Committee remains confident that the combination of disclosures on the organisation's approach to taxes and payments to governments, the ways in which this approach is embedded in the organisation, and the outcomes of this approach in terms of the tax paid on a jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis is the appropriate combination of information to provide insight into the tax practices of an organisation. If I turn for a moment to the concept of country-by-country reporting, which of course, as you know, has elicited a lot of discussion, both from stakeholders and the GSSB, it is the TC's position that only by looking at the indicators of economic activity and tax paid on a geographical basis can an assessment be made about the alignment of the tax contribution with the economic substance of an organisation in a particular economy, and as such, an assessment of the impact of an organisation's tax practices on that economy. The Technical Committee acknowledges this type of reporting will involve a level of effort from reporting organisations and have made changes to Disclosures 4 and 5 in recognition that there also needs to be a balance with feasibility, cost and reasonableness. However, they remain confident that over time, the information required by the disclosure is possible for organisations to collate and publish, and that the content of the standard builds on existing requirements, such as the OECD's transfer pricing guidelines, commonly known as BEPS, and also aligns with the expectations of stakeholders, including several reporting organisations, on what future tax transparency requirements will look like. Okay, just as a quick reminder, the draft still consists of 5 disclosures. The first 3 disclosures focus on how the organisation manages taxes and payments to government. This provides insight into the principles the organisation has adopted for its tax practices, including what type of tax practices are deemed acceptable and unacceptable by the organisation and its highest governance body. It also requires the reporting organisation to describe whether it aims to comply with the letter of the law or the spirit of the law in its tax practices, and whether it considered the impact on sustainable development when developing its tax strategy. Disclosures 4 and 5, the topic-specific disclosures, are focused, as I mentioned, on the reporting of relevant economic, financial and tax data on a jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis, in order to provide a level of insight into the alignment of the tax paid by an organisation with the value created in a particular economy in which they operate. As was noted by GSSB members previously, there is an expectation articulated in the standard that both Disclosures 4 and 5 are reported by an organisation. This has been included because Disclosure 4 provides essential contextual information for Disclosure 5 and on its own provides no insight into taxes or payments to governments specifically. The decision to break this into 2 disclosures was in order to enhance the readability of the requirements and to clearly outline the logic of the reporting. Okay, so as I mentioned, since we last met, and as you saw outlined in item 2 of the pre-reading, there have been a number of significant changes to the draft standard. I'll start with the general changes. A number of edits have been made to the wording and layout of the standard in response to comments about clarity and consistency with other standards. For example, all instances of the use of the word expected have been removed from any guidance, with the only remaining use of this word related to the reporting of Disclosure 4 and 5, which I just mentioned. The management approach disclosures have once again been cross-checked with GRI 102 and GRI 103, and a reference to disclosure 102.17 has been added to the guidance for disclosure 2B to ensure the linkages between these disclosures are clear. The reasoning behind the inclusion of additional detail in the management approach requirements in this standard is similar to those that were laid out for OH&S and water. The technical committee highlighted that there are specific documents and governance structures that should be in place for the management of tax and payments to governments, which are aligned, and the ones that have been listed in the disclosure are aligned with other sets of guidelines, such as principles developed by the B team and legislation such as that in the UK. Without explicit reference to these, the TC felt that the reporting on management approach is likely to lack in the relevant and specific detail needed. Okay, if I move now to the changes to the topic-specific disclosures. I am going to read through these, so I apologise for the long-winded nature of the next little bit. The instruction that an organisation shall compile information for these disclosures using figures consistent with its audited financial statements or with the financial information that the organisation has filed on public record has been moved from the introductory section and various other locations to a compilation requirement clause 1.4.2. This has been done to reduce confusion about which data points this was relevant to, and now explicitly specifies the relevant data points. Provisions have been made at the beginning of the topic-specific disclosures that acknowledge that reporting organisations may not have all the data available for all jurisdictions, as well as to enable reporting organisations to exclude information where they are a minority shareholding or the non-operating joint venture partner. This might be a good place for me to just pause and make it very clear that the entities that we're asking for to be reported as part of the country-by-country reporting are those that have been consolidated as part of the organisation's accounts. If they are not part of the consolidated financial statement, they do not need to be reported on as part of this standard. In addition, these extra carve-outs for minority shareholding or the non-operating joint venture partnerships allows an organisation to point to the relevant source where they do not have data available. Okay. The requirement to report entities included in the organisation's audited financial statements or in the financial information filed on the public record that are deemed by the organisation not to be resident in any tax jurisdiction has been removed from the reporting requirements in Disclosure 4 as it was causing some confusion for readers. Further clarity on how to report entities not deemed to be resident in any jurisdiction, which is what is required by Disclosure 4, has been provided under Compilation Requirement Clause 1.2. The previous requirement in Disclosure 5 to report the number of employees and total employee remuneration for each tax jurisdiction has now been split into two parts. The number of employees is now included as a reporting requirement in Disclosure 4, and total employee remuneration has now become a reporting recommendation. Excuse me. Okay. Previous reporting requirements included in Disclosure 5, namely taxes withheld and paid on behalf of employees, tax collected from customers on behalf of a tax authority, and industry-related and other taxes or payments to government, have now been moved to become reporting recommendations in Disclosure 5. Moving on, the requirement to report a corporate tax reconciliation for each tax jurisdiction has been amended to introduce a level of flexibility. Now the requirement reads that the organisation needs to report the reasons for the difference between corporate tax accrued on profit loss and the tax due if the statutory tax rate is applied to profit loss before tax. This enables a qualitative description of the reasons rather than the quantitative reconciliation which was previously required. The corresponding guidance has also been amended to simplify this requirement, allowing organisations to collate smaller reconciling items into a generic category. This was in response to concerns about the complexity and proportionate value of this data. So for clarity, that's the list of the main changes. Of course, there are a number of smaller changes throughout the document, which you might have noticed when you were reading it. For clarity, I'm just going to quickly show you the current structure of 4 and 5. So you can see the reporting requirements for disclosure 4 there. We have A and B, and you can see under B4, the number of employees are now included as a reporting requirement here. As I mentioned, total employee remuneration has now become a reporting recommendation rather than a reporting requirement. And if I move to 5, you can see the number of reporting requirements in Disclosure 5 have been reduced, with 3 requirements moved to recommendations and 1 moved, as I mentioned, to Disclosure 4. The core intention of this disclosure is to provide an insight into the alignment of the economic substance of a company and location and the corresponding income tax by an organisation. A number of indicators are used in order to provide insight into economic activity. No indicator by itself is perfect, but when read together, they can provide an overview of an organisation's activity and the importance of that organisation in the jurisdiction. You can now see here the reporting recommendations for Disclosure 5, and you can see the 3 previous reporting requirements that were related to other types of tax other than corporate tax, namely 1.7.1, 1.7.2 and 1.7.3. The inclusion of these as reporting recommendations reflects that corporate tax is only one type of tax contribution an organisation makes to any particular economy. It is reflective of the business constituency's request that they be able to be clear about their total tax contribution, not just their corporate income tax. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion of the overview of the changes to the standard. If I just quickly give you a very quick update about the plan with this proposal moving forward from today, we would plan to have a 90-day public comment period, ideally commencing mid-December and finishing mid-March. The questions in this comment period would would be focused on, of course, getting feedback on the standard's clarity, completeness, feasibility, relevance and alignment with other frameworks, but also with validating the understood purpose and use of these disclosures for information users. This is, of course, in response to some questions about what this specific information would be used for by readers of the reports. I'll also just mention here, and you would have seen in item 2 of the pre-reading, we also plan, in response to some concerns raised, to further interrogate the alignment of this reporting to other existing tax reporting. And to see whether there is opportunities for further alignment between existing practice and this particular standard. Okay, so that brings me to the section where we're going to take any further comments, questions or concerns from the GSSB. So I'll hand back over to Bastian and Judy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mia. That was great, and I want to say thank you to you and to the members of the technical committee who've been very conscientious and worked really quite hard on this entire process throughout the course of 2018, and have been very keen to hear feedback and to respond to feedback at a number of occasions. So just to remind the GSSB members, what we're asked to do today is to assess whether or not this proposed content is now ready to receive public comment. We do not need, nor would it be useful for us to try to have a process among the GSSB where we seek to sort of finalize the content at all. There's no kind of opportunity for us to do that. But what we can do is to make sure that the sort of fundamental challenge that the GSSB put to the members of the technical committee has been met to the extent that we can now go out for public comment. Do we have any? I know that there have been a number of questions and comments and so forth raised by email in advance of this meeting. some of those are actually at the level of detailed feedback such that we would like to receive during the public comment period and then evaluate as a whole once we've heard all of the feedback. But there might be some that people want to raise now with respect to the sort of overall whether the initial challenge has been met and whether or not the contents themselves are of suitable quality to go out for public comment. So can I, before I do that, I'd like to actually ask Kent, because he's one of our GSSB members who's been very much involved in this technical committee. Could you please, Kent, if you don't mind, just give a few words around where you believe with both of your hats on, if you like, your GSSB hat as well as your technical committee hat, and just give us a little bit of an overview as to where you think the technical committee has got to with this discussion. Is that all right?
I look forward to it. Thank you, Judy. Yeah, I think I can address some of the questions that come up. I know that this is likely to be a controversial area, and actually when we receive sort of detailed questions, it's nice because we get the opportunity to think about how to respond to those and try to identify those things that are things that we really need to make changes, or maybe those things that where there just needs to be a little bit more understanding of what the standard's about. The one area, so in my world, there's sort of two big areas. I think that one's kind of been addressed, and this is, there was some response about that this would be costly for reporters to assemble this information, and I don't disagree with it. That's true with everything in the GRI, and that reason by itself, that's a reason to have the exposure draft, I would think, so that reporters could, if they have those concerns, they could voice those concerns. And we always have to make a judgment call on every standard, whether we're concerned about the cost of compliance. And there's been a lot of effort sort of modifying the standard to sort of take that into account. But I think another really bigger issue has something to do with the extent to which we sort of want to define terms, and where these terms came from that we use in the standard. And I do give a lot of credit to the members of the tax committee. These people really are, I said this at the last meeting, but these people really are global experts, and their insights are good ones, and their use of terminology is careful, although I would say that there are probably places in the standard, we've all read it so many times, that there are specific items, I'm sure, where the wording can be improved. But the main place that the information was taken from was from the OECD guidelines, and this is called Action 13 in their 2015 final report, and it's their documentation on country-by-country reporting. And this is been the main place where country-by-country reporting is required, and it is a small set of companies in a sense, but it's also the world's largest, and it's somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 companies that are subject to existing OECD requirements for country-by-country reporting. And one of the things they do in the OECD reporting is when they ask for information, they don't get into detailed definitions of what something means, like tax payments on a cash basis, because they assume that companies are going to refer to their own accounting standards. And, for many of us, this accounting standards are a mystery, but in the United States, we use one set of standards. In Europe, certainly, we use the IFRS, but those are also used widely around the world. They're defined, by the standard setters. And so somehow the OECD in their requirements has been able to get a few thousand companies to report on country-by-country reporting without getting into too many detailed definitions about accounting terminology, mainly in my mind because I think that the definitions of these terms are well established. Now, that's not just from my background as a professor. I also teach at KPMG, and I teach sort of at a global level at KPMG. I actually teach this issue of sort of what some of these terminology, what is meant by this terminology. In fact, just come back from their training center in Orlando, and the terminology that we use is terminology that's widely understood. And I just would report, there was this question about, sort of which standard did we use or look to decide what we were going to write. And it really is this Action 13 by the OECD. And when they get down to actually suggesting what should be reported on a country-by-country basis, they actually say it just in one sentence. And they say, this is what they say. They say aggregate information relating to the amount of revenue, profit, loss before income tax paid, income tax accrual, stated capital, accumulated earnings, number of employees, intangible assets other than cash or cash equivalents with regard to each jurisdiction. Now that's the totality of the information that they provide about what's supposed to be reported. Again, sort of under the assumption that, if you're in the U.S. and you read these terms based on the standards in the U.S., you understand what they mean. And I believe what they do, these aren't controversial terms. And then the same, if you're using IFRS, you would understand what these mean. And, with that level of definition, somehow we've got a number of very large companies. Somewhere, I looked up last night, but there's somewhere in the range of 2,000 companies that are involved in this, that are doing this reporting, that they're somehow able to do that. It's not surprising. That is when I teach students, and I'll give you an example. I was a little surprised at one particular response. There was a question that said something that, what do we mean by the perception of cash basis, income taxes paid? I've never actually had that question before from anyone around the world, because cash basis reporting means cash basis reporting. And I think that accountants around the world do know what it means. And so I'm comfortable. I want to make sure that the terms are clear in the standard that we have, but we don't want to conflict with accounting standards in individual jurisdictions. That is, we want to use their definitions. And if we don't do that, if we start to put in detailed definitions, then we start to be in conflict with the financial reporting practices of companies. And so I think that we want to be careful about that. And so again, I think that the tax committee, although we looked at many sources of existing standards in this area, they primarily drew from the OECD requirements because these are the most prominent and used by the most companies. And again, I feel comfortable that, that we should be a little careful unless we're going to hire a team of accountants to come up with a new set of standards, that we can, the terminology that we use, as long as it's well understood by the world of accountants. And I know that for people that are non-accountants, accounting terminology can be a mystery, but as, in the world of accountants and then the analysts that look at information that accountants produce, as long as these terms are well understood, that I would be a little bit careful about creating really detailed definitions. The one last thing I'd say is Mia did respond to one important comment. We're always talking, when we're talking about what we want to have disclosed, and we could clarify this in the standard if it's not clear, is we're talking about the information that's in the consolidated financial statements. And I think that's widely understood, but we definitely want to be clear on that. And we're certainly not asking for companies to report on things that happen with regard to companies they happen to be invested in, but are not a consolidated part of their financial statement. And so that's kind of that's an attempt on my part to sort of address sort of a big part of some of the questions that come up. I do have this sort of general concern that, a year or so ago, we decided that we're going to go forward with this. And I do feel, I have the sense now that there's people kind of go, there's some response of sort of, I'm having a little bit of cold feet because this is controversial. And it is. I've had that exact same feeling about this, is I don't know exactly how reporters are going to respond. But when there was a comment that was written by one of our members that said the standards might be too much for certain entities. And I go, yeah, well, that might be, but for me, that's something that we would identify through issuing that exposure draft. I mean, I'm not personally, as an accountant, I'm not personally convinced that this is overwhelming for either small companies or large companies, but certainly that's something that we want to get feedback on. And my whole goal is to sort of push this thing forward. We want to improve the language of the standard, but I think the technical committee, that these are highly competent people. I haven't tried to sway them in any way in what they've put into the standard, but at every stage I've been very impressed with their way of going about this. And their knowledge on the topic. And so I'm a little concerned about sort of circling back to things that we were thinking about a year ago, it certainly is a legitimate discussion. If people are having some hesitation now as to whether we ought to do this, we better get that off the table quickly, because we can't go forward without that without that commitment to go forward. And so I just this sort of in my world, sort of two comments is are we really committed to doing this? And two, this issue about how detailed are we going to get about definitions, and sort of which standards did we use as a basis for what we've written. And so I hope that provides a bit of an overview, and then I'd be happy to hear from others.
Thank you very much for that, Kent. I think the point that you make about let's not second guess what will be the nature of the public comments received. Let's let the public make those comments, and then we can evaluate those. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with this discussion at the moment, and just make sure that we have dealt with any concerns that might prevent that from happening. I have Kirsten raising a hand. Would you like to say something?
Thank you, Judy. First of all, I would just like to say that I'm sorry that about my push the button comment in the email I sent to all of you with my comments, which I realized that could have been understood as a specific comment towards the technical committee, which it was not. It was a general comment, but my wording was not clear on that. Secondly, I agree to the approach of country-by-country reporting. My main concern is, however, the speed that this draft standard puts up to. We have been doing, in Hydro, we have been doing country-by-country reporting since 2005, voluntary extractive industries transparency initiative report. Sorry,
Kirsten.
I fell out on my phone, and I'm sitting in quite a noisy environment, but I'll have to switch it then on my laptop instead.
Kirsten, can you make sure? Kirsten,
in my
excuse me, Kirsten,
or
could you?
How much you heard of what I said?
Kirsten, could you just make sure that you go up to your microphone so that we can hear you? You're a bit muffled at the moment. We did hear.
I can't hear anything, so I'll no.
We did follow you, or at least I followed you, as far as you were talking about doing country by country reporting since I believe you said 2003 on a voluntary basis, and I think that's about where it went wonky for me.
Thank you. We have done it since 2005 on a voluntary basis. Since 2014. There came extensive Norwegian requirements to extractive industries on country-by-country reporting, and in 2017 those requirements were significantly extended. So I do have some experiences in doing country-by-country reporting. I have also then worked together with another large Norwegian company to understand the Norwegian regulations, which are not clear in the definition, and so I've seen some of the problems that I now also see in this draft. That it will be difficult for the reporting organization to report according to the standard, and in some cases, as mentioned in the email I've shared with all of you, it can be more confusing than it is clarifying. I do do understand where Kent is coming from and the technical committee is coming from, but please also be aware that when you are going to report according to standard, it's also important to understand what is really meant here. And I made he was the chief accountant, go through the exposure draft, and she had very many of the same comments as I did, and went even further, especially on the definition side. But as I said, it's the speed that is mainly concerning me. It goes so much beyond all the legal requirements you can find worldwide today, as far as I know at least. I would have preferred to go one step at a time and not run the full mile in once. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'll just reflect very briefly on the fact that, once we sort of understand the nature of the public comments, we can obviously improve whatever the content is that comes out of this. But then there's a different question for the GSSB about what is the timing, what is the correct format, and means of introducing this content as part of the suite of standards over a certain period of time that is yet to be determined by this standards board. We do definitely have the capability and I would say the responsibility to deal with those in the fullness of time. We will go through once we receive the comments on the content at a technical level and at a sort of practical reporting level. That will all help us to understand what then do we do with this information with respect to rolling it out. Do we have any others who would like to raise a hand at this point? Any further discussion or questions? I'm not seeing any on the chat box, but please do speak up or let us know if you'd like to say something. Kent, do you have any additional words just in response at this point, or shall we move to a consensus view on this?
Well, I had a discussion with Bastian and with Mia about this and the best ways to go forward. And I think, the mechanics of how we go forward are really, that they should take the lead on that. And so I guess I would turn it over to either Bastian and Mia and ask for their recommendation about how we go forward.
Bastian, would you like to do that?
Yes, I can do this. I think where we are right now is we have brought back your comments from the September meeting to the technical committee. We, as the standards team, feel comfortable that we were able to explore with the technical committee the commentary that we have received from the GSB and the field test, and that what they are currently proposing is what they can agree on as a group of experts as recommendations to the GSSB. We see very little room to explore the issues that have been raised in September further. I think this is now at a time where it would be useful to receive public commentary. As to the comments raised by email by different members of the GSSB, we believe that it is important to look at these comments and differentiate between those that could point to wording improvements, editing of the text now to set out clearly the expectations. And that is something that we could potentially still implement between now and a public comment. To give an example for that, there was commentary about what exactly needs to be reconciled, or whether indeed it is the financial statements that are referred to in terms of a basis of information for this type of reporting. And this type of formulation we can look at again based on suggestions by the GSSB to improve that, and that we hopefully set this out very clearly at this stage. What could also be added to the public comment questions are questions around addressing some of the concerns that have been raised. If there are specific suggestions for feedback that the GSB would like to receive from report preparers and information users, we would invite you to submit those and make that part of the public comment process, so that we can steer also the review of stakeholders in a specific direction. Again, I think I would go back to the purpose of the public comment here, and that is at this stage to solicit further input from a wider set of stakeholders. We've talked to the experts, we have talked to the leaders in the space, but there are certainly many out there that have opinions about this effort. And we feel it is time now to open this up and make it available. Always also outlining very clearly that it will go back to a technical committee, and importantly the GSSB, for further consideration based on the public comment received. So there's no automatism here that this will end up being a standard in the way it is right now. There's no automatism here in terms of that this is the basis for that we build on further. We will look at the full standard again in light of the public comment received. Our suggestion would be to proceed with this at this stage. I think we have Kirsten and Kent who want to come in with further comments. Kirsten first. And Julie, right now we cannot hear you, unfortunately, so I will just collect the feedback from members that want to provide feedback at the moment. So Kirsten first and then Kent.
Thank you, Bastian. First of all, I'm sorry I haven't been able to come back to you on the email you sent me as an answer to my comments. I'm traveling in Brazil and have not had very much spare time. My main concern about the process is that the preparers of the reports have, as far as I've understood, been involved to a limited extent. I do suggest that we do have another round with preparers of reports to look into the feasibility. But it's not only the preparers of the report, it is also necessary for, or would have been very valuable to me to better understand how the users of the report are planning to use the information that is being suggested by the draft. Well, some of the information is easy for me to see how they can use and how it will create value. For other parts, that is more difficult to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I think Judy is still trying to get back online at the moment. Oh, she's back. But just to pick up on your comment, so your suggestion is to have yet another round of field testing like we did over summer with business, because we've explicitly, on the request of the GSB, also acknowledging that business constituency, some members felt that they are underrepresented on the technical committee. We did explicitly reach out to a whole range of preparers, arguably the ones that are more experienced and the industries that are more experienced with this. But you're suggesting we would do another round of field testing on this at this stage before we represent this back to the GSSB. Am I correct in assuming this?
Well, I do remember you said that ICMM had been consulted, but I can't remember that we have seen the response from the business organizations that have been consulted here.
Thank you for that question, Kirsten. So ICMM was provided with a copy of the draft that you also saw for the September meeting. In response to that, a number of ICMM members provided specific written comments, including and also verbal comments. We had some meetings with some members as well. One in particular provided very detailed comments. The comments that were collected during the field test were summarised, so they were anonymised and summarised and provided back to the technical committee as a detailed report and then presented to the GSSB. An overview was presented to the GSSB in September. So certainly those comments have been received and heard as part of the field test process.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Kent wanted to come in.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. I dropped out for a moment, so I wasn't sure if everybody who'd raised their hand had gotten to speak. So Kent, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that this standard is likely to be controversial. I expect that there will be comment. That is, in a way, I kind of hope it, because one of the nice things that Kirsten did is she read it in detail. And I know that Mia and Bastion, or the Standards Division, has really made an effort to find organizations that would read through it carefully. But I think that to some extent, that's kind of an uphill battle. And I'm hoping, however we go forward, that we'll get more reporters to do something like Kirsten has done, where they actually sit down and read it thoroughly, and that we actually get their responses. Now, I personally have my own concerns about some of the reporting issues, about how difficult it may be to provide the information, but I really would like to hear more from reporters. And again, in whatever process we go through to go forward, I'm just hoping that there's reporters out there that will be as thorough as Kirsten has been, so we really understand what concerns are.
Yes, I agree. The engagement with this content so far has been extremely helpful, and I think it will only be more so the more feedback we get from reporters. I have a comment from Robin. Could some of these questions and issues be raised quite specifically and in a very structured way during the public comment period, particularly with reporters and report users? Now, it did occur to me during the conversation we've just been having, Bastion and Mia, that we often do, when we have an exposure draft for public comment, we often have a specific feedback framework presented along with it, with particular questions that we are asking for feedback on with respect to the proposed draft. Can we do something like that for this one to make sure that we elicit the right feedback on these kind of questions that have come up? Do you have any thoughts on that?
This, Bastian, absolutely. So we have drafted questions based on what we've learned over the course of the project and pain points that we should be highlighting. But of course, this can be shared with the GSB, and that was my suggestion earlier also to use the public comment to explore specific areas of concern further and point respondents, reviewers of the exposure draft to these areas through the way we ask questions and highlight certain subject matters. So as an action, what we could do is share with the GSSB the questions that have currently been put together for the public comment and invite the GSSB to refine or add further questions to that.
Okay, and I think we would have to put together quite a specific time frame for doing that so that we can get on with the public comment period, and equally make sure that the GSSB members have the opportunity to feed into that.
Yes. So as Mia outlined, we were planning to go for public comment mid-December. So that would mean that feedback on the questions would need to happen in the next days, as soon as possible. But it is something that is ready and could be sent out within the next hours to the GSSB members for review.
Okay. Are there any other points that members would like to raise? It seems to me, Pamela, that we might be having one or two issues with people being on the line. Is that right?
Yes, I'm just reconfirming if everyone is on the line, but I do see that some appear to be offline at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, even is there.
Do we need to do a quick roll call to make sure that we're doing this properly?
We can do that. Yes, of course.
Are you able to sort of confirm where we stand at the moment?
I think at the moment we have everyone on the line, because I was just missing Evan, and I think Nankumar is still on the line, if I'm not mistaken. He is on mute.
Yes, I am online. Thank you.
Thank you, Nankumar. Do you want me to do a roll call?
If it is your opinion that everyone that we expect to be on the line is on the line, then I don't think we need to do that. I just wanted to confirm that there wasn't a problem.
Okay.
Okay, good. Well, I think that means we can move to establish the consensus of the GSSB that this should be now released for public comment, subject to agreeing the feedback process for doing so. As Bastian has just described to us, we will need to do that within just the next few days to really make sure that we can hold to our timelines. Can I call the question at the moment whether there are any outstanding concerns or issues that would prevent this document from being exposed for public comment at the present time? I'm not hearing any. And I hope that means that we have consensus that we can do so as discussed. And I'd like to again reiterate our thanks to the Standards Division team, to Mia and Bastian, and very especially to the members of the Technical Committee for all of their efforts in this direction. And I presume that you will come back to us very shortly with the proposal for how to sign off on the public comment feedback format of whatever description you would like to put forward to us.
Absolutely. We will make sure that we are in touch today with you with an update on that, and also suggesting a time frame for your feedback.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. And I think maybe just as a little side note here, I would like to just advise you that in case anyone had a question about this, the board signed off on our proposed changes to the GSSB terms of reference and the due process protocol, as we have been discussing at numerous occasions over recent months. And that means that we are officially cleared to take action by electronic means. So if we do need to do something electronically, then it is perfectly possible for us to do that. I don't think we're this is something that needs to be subject to necessarily full GSSB review. However, let's take that one step at a time, and Bastian will look forward to your information on that. I understand we are running over time a little bit, and I believe we have been joined by Helena Barton, have we not?
Yes, hi, this is Helena here. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Helena. Yes, we can. I wonder if we ought to just jump forward to that part of the agenda, which is session 4 now. This is the update on the Independent Appointment Committee's appointments to the GSSB. Would you like to take us forward in that discussion, Helena. Thank you for joining.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to speak to the board today. Yes, I'd like to give you a quick update on the committee's activities in this past year, 2018. We have undertaken all the necessary activities of appointing members to both the GSSB and to the DPOC. And I'll just run through the DPOC appointments and then the GSSB appointments. So with regards to the DPOC appointments, we had 2 vacancies to fill this year. And we held an open call for nominations, which ran from May to June. And this is, of course, for new members who would start serving from the 1st of January 2019. So we had the open call. We also did some very targeted, dedicated outreach to a number of organizations, including some who have standard-setting activities, so that we could get as good a pool of qualified candidates as possible. And from all the applications we received, we shortlisted 5 candidates, and they were interviewed in August and September. So the 2 successful candidates, I believe, will be publicly announced early January, which is also when they'll start. The DPOC, as you may know, is not subject to quite the same constituency or regional balance requirements that other governance bodies are. But with these 2 new members, I can tell you we will have a DPOC that comprises 2 women and 3 men, 3 from Europe, 1 from Africa, and 1 from South Asia. And actually, it also falls, you may not be aware, but it also falls under the remit of the Independent Appointments Committee to appoint the chair of the DPOC, and we will be doing that from the 5 members at our committee meeting in December. Of course, regarding the 2 people who have rolled off the IAC, we've formally thanked them for their excellent service and their commitment to GRI. And I will be joining actually the DPOC's final call for the year as well to repeat that directly to the DPOC. Regarding GSSB appointments, we had to fill 6 vacancies this year, including 1 casual vacancy. And after all of the open calls and the direct outreach, we received a number of nominations. We shortlisted 15 candidates for interviews, and we held them throughout August, September, and again, right with the casual vacancy, we're still in the process of finalizing those appointments, but very shortly we will have filled the 6 vacancies. And as you may know, of course, for this appointment process, we really look at, of course, the candidate's experience, which constituency they represent, gender diversity, geographic diversity, and given the candidates who applied and so on, we have really sought to get the balanced representation that we would like to see. It may not always be achieved over one appointment cycle, but we really are committed to addressing this as best as we can at every opportunity when we're filling the vacancies. But perhaps to give you an idea, just pending the final appointments, and so of course this is not final numbers, but we're looking at possibly 6 or 7 women and 8 to 9 men comprising the new GSSB, so that makes up the 15. And in terms of regions, we have actually now got, or will have from January, representation from a couple of regions that perhaps weren't represented before. So we're quite pleased that we've managed to get a slightly better balance there, and as I said, we're very, very committed to keep doing that. I would just like to end by really, really thanking all of you for your continued dedicated service to GRI as you serve on the GSSB. And to those of you who are stepping down at the end of this year, a special warm thanks from the whole Independent Appointments Committee and from me as well. We really appreciate everything that you have brought to the GSSB's work. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Judy.
Thank you, Helena. Is it possible to share with the GSSB the names and affiliations of the new members, and to share the status of there are a number of our existing members who are up for potential renomination? I think it might be helpful for the GSSB to be able to know what's happened with that. Is that something we can talk about?
I can't give names at this point just because we're still finalizing the appointments. So I'd prefer not to make this the public announcement. I'm not sure I would be authorized to do that. But yes, of course, there are people who end their term, and as we've said before, if you apply for a second term, you enter back into the full pool of candidates. But we've had some conversations with the people who are ending on the GSSB, and we're again just very grateful for their commitment and everything they brought to the GSSB's work, and we're sure that our paths will cross again.
Thank you very much. Kent, would you like to ask a question?
I don't really have a question. I'm not sure that the members of the GSSB know Helena Barton. I just wanted to mention, say first of all, Helena, how much I appreciate all of the effort you make with regard to the GRI. For those who don't know, and I'll probably say this wrong, Helena, but as my understanding is you're the Deloitte's partner in charge of sustainability reporting globally. That maybe that's an overstatement, but I think it's something like that. But anyway, you've had a huge impact on the GRI. You've been very, very involved with it, and I appreciate that. And you've been very helpful to me personally. And so, again, my thanks for everything that you do.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you. Let me just correct for the record that I don't lead Deloitte's global sustainability reporting, but we're a group of partners who work across the world with sustainability reporting as our main focus. But thank you so much for the kind words.
I'm not able to join the chat now, but this is Kirsten Hovig speaking. I do understand that it's not possible to share the names with us today, but I really hope that the GSSB will be informed at the very latest in parallel with the information getting public. It has happened earlier that we have received the information via Twitter, etc., and so that would be most appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Sorry. Yeah, I'm happy to make sure that you are informed as soon as possible. As I said, we're just finalizing some acceptances. We're still missing the finalizing the casual vacancy. That will all be done at the IAC's meeting middle of next week. So after that, we should be able to reach out to that final candidate and then get their confirmation. And once that's all settled, then I'd be happy to communicate with you, Judy, and you can share it with the board.
Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us on the line today, and we look forward to being in touch with you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. So returning to our agenda, can we flip backwards? We skipped ahead so that we could accommodate Helena when she was on the line. We have the discussion, session number 3. Now this is items 3 and 4. which are pertaining to the sector program and the pilot proposal for the mining sector project to discuss. This is potentially a reasonably long conversation. I am hoping that we can deal with it rather more efficiently than is proposed in the agenda. May I turn it over to Madare and to Bastian to tell us how they would like to proceed with this discussion?
Okay, yeah, we will be a bit stretched for time here, but we will do the utmost to actually present to you now for the first time a full description of the sector program and also a proposal for the pilot. We have a new team on board. Some of you have met Madea already at the in-person meeting, but we also have Karen now joining us, and they will do the presentation today. What I need to say about this is that we're presenting this for discussion today, and for your input. We want to refine these two documents that we're presenting based on the discussion, and importantly, also get to a point that we can discuss these drafts with the GRI board and the stakeholder council as per due process. We are required to solicit their feedback as well, and to not hold us back too much in the overall process. We want to do that by the end of the year. So feedback that you can provide today is very valuable in refining the drafts that will then, pending your agreement with us today, also be shared with the SC and the GI board. We will now venture into the detail of the two items. We assume that the items have been read by you, so we won't repeat all the detail in it. And for both the sector program description as well as the pilot project proposal, there will be an opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback. Thank you. And without further ado, I will now ask Madea to present the sector program.
Thank you, Bastian, and thank you, Judy. Hello, GSSB members, especially those of you that I haven't met before. I'm testing out a clicker here. Looks like it's working. Okay, so I'm going to be briskly running through this. We are going to go over some updates on the sector program team. We will go over the sector program purpose and the expected benefits that we're hoping for. We'll go over something about the scope in terms of sector coverage. We'll also go over how we have prioritized sectors up to this point, as well as our review of sector classification systems. We will go over a little bit about process and timelines and discuss next steps. And at that point, we'll open up for discussion and questions. So a bit about the team. Bastian just introduced me and as well as Karen, so I won't speak about us anymore, but I did just want you to know that we have also hired Nora Puro as manager for the sector program, and she will be joining us in January of 2019. She's coming to us from the communications department at GRI. And we are also actively recruiting an additional manager that we believe will be able to start in Q1 of 2019. Which will enable us to run potentially multiple projects concurrently. What is the purpose of the sector program? So very simply, we think that more clarity is needed on the issues that constitute a sector's most significant impacts from a sustainable development perspective. We think that the sector program can help focus corporate reporting toward organizations' most significant impacts and stakeholder concerns. We think that the sector program can support existing corporate reporters by including explanations of their issues. We think that the program can encourage new reporters to participate in sustainability reporting by providing an entry point to the GRI standards. We think that the sector program can support stakeholders that use sustainability reporting in their decision-making, such as ratings agencies or investment firms. We think that the sector program can support civil discourse on sustainability issues. We think that the sector program will meet an existing demand for up-to-date and authoritative sector standards. And we think that there's an opportunity for the sector program to enhance the technical features of the GRI reporting framework. Now, what benefits might be expected from the release of sector standards? we think we can achieve increased transparency and accountability from corporate reporters on issues that matter in their sector. We think that the program has potential to increase comparability of reporting within a covered sector. We think the program will likely surface emerging issues for stakeholders. And we think that the sector program can build a stronger foundation for sustainable decision-making. The scope of the program. So this is something where we've made a starting point and we have preliminary ideas. We're likely to continue to need input and we'll ask for help on this. We know that we are going to develop and publish sector standards. We have been trying to determine the right level of granularity for stakeholders. Our preliminary assumption is that this is approximately 40 sectors. And we know that the program will begin with a pilot project in 2019. So at this point, we have sorted sectors into priority groups. You can see them below, priority 1, 2, and 3. And we've also pictured for you the priority group 1 sectors, which we think are important sectors to cover quite early. These include mining and oil and gas and chemicals and agriculture and so on. So I imagine there will be much discussion about this, but this is a starting point. What criteria did we use to decide which sectors should be prioritized? We looked at the prevalence of the sector in GRI reporting because this is an indication of the impact that we might have if reporting practice improves. We also did a qualitative assessment of the impacts of the sector economically, environmentally, and socially. And we also looked for the strength of a literature on the sector's impacts to provide a strong evidence base. Now, part of determining how many sectors to cover and what should we call them also meant that we looked at and reviewed sector classification systems. So some work was done on this before I arrived at GRI, and there was actually a lot of input gathered from stakeholders in interviews that we reviewed very carefully and looked at to try to decide whether we should adopt a single external sector classification system. So we started with what do we really need for the program? We need a naming system that's recognizable to all stakeholders, regardless of the classification systems that they use or are familiar with. What we noticed in our review was that each classification system had a slightly different approach, but that there were many commonalities as well. And in the stakeholder feedback, there were some observations that really struck us. There was a lack of agreement on whether an external sector classification system was suitable for GRI's sector program. And we also noticed that external sector classification systems were not recognized or understood by some stakeholders. So on that basis, we propose a naming system that uses some common denominator names or easily recognizable names, such as mining, oil and gas, agriculture, but without adopting a single external classification system. And we also would like to decide the name and the sort of key and reference point or description to explain what is included or excluded within a given sector standard at the project proposal stage, and to have that be part of the GSSB approval process. So what is the process? And I think this will look quite familiar to you, especially if you've been on the GSSB for a while, working on standards development. So we are still following the due process protocol, and we're still following the basic stages that you see in standards development. There's going to be a research and formation stage where we'll be conducting desktop research to preliminarily identify and describe issues of importance for a sector. And we'll also be forming a multi-stakeholder project working group. Then we'll have a draft development stage. It will be a multi-stakeholder process. It will involve meetings that are both virtual and in person. And it will include a group survey and analysis of the results of that survey. There will also be an exposure to public comment. And we will incorporate public feedback, just as in GRI standards development. And then there will be a revision or finalization stage, and finally a release of the sector standard. What are the next steps? We're seeking 3 members of the GSSB to help us by volunteering for a subcommittee. We know we have a lot of finer points to work out for the sector program. We have finer points on, is 40 the exact correct number, or might it be some other number in terms of sector coverage? How might we adjust the prioritization plan that we have in place right now, and on what basis? There are also some features of the product design in terms of what's included, what's excluded, how do we incorporate SDGs, and so on. And we also will want to talk over what might be the reporting obligations that are conferred on companies by the release of a sector standard. So we believe we will have 2 to 3 calls with this subcommittee in the next couple of months, December 2018 and January 2019, and then periodic calls thereafter in 2019 to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. So at this point, I think we can open up for discussion and questions.
Thank you very much, Madir. And I'm hoping that the discussion and questions will be relatively simple and straightforward. This is a program that we have looked forward to launching very eagerly for quite a while now. So I think the GSSB is in general going to be excited to support the Standards Division in this direction. May I ask the GSSB whether there are any members who'd like to make a comment or question?
Yeah, this is Dwight.
Please go ahead, Dwight.
Yes, I know this may be a little premature in the development, but I think that in developing some kind of template for the sector standards, we might want to look at some of the concepts in the OECD due diligence guidance, and in particular, the kinds of impacts that would be particularly special or common in the sector, in the products or outcomes of the sector, and in geographic areas that are common or peculiar to the sector, and also in business relationships, particularly, through which impacts may occur. And the nature of the business relationships is sort of the economic organization of the sector, and how the enterprises organize themselves in their relationships. And, obviously this is not the sort of thing to do today, but I just wanted to put a marker down because I think that we should try to incorporate this work not only into the SDGs, but into some other instruments and policy considerations, of which I think the due diligence guidance of the OECD would be the most important.
Thank you very much for that, Dwight. I think that's very helpful. Madir, can I leave it with you to take that on board and let us know what you'd like to do with it at a later date? Perhaps sort of take that under advisement and then come back to us the next time you update the group as to the progress. Does that sound about right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dwight.
Perfect. Okay. I have a comment from Kirsten on the chat box. Question: are there separate work groups for the sector program and the mining pilot? Could you maybe just tell us a little bit about the working group sort of structure for this work?
Yes, so I think it's a little bit confusing since we had kind of a 2-in-1 on the agenda. The project working group is for the mining pilot project, and then there would be different groups for the sectors that follow that. The subcommittee is sort of for the program as a whole to help steer it. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you very much. To my mind, it does, but I will go back to the members to ask whether that helps. There's another one from Evan in the chat box. That's exactly the same question, right? So he asked the same question as Kirsten. So hopefully we've now answered it. We have another question from Vincent Kong. I would like to ask a simple question first. Have we ever tried to make use of the existing GRI G4 sector supplements and see how they represent the industries GRI is serving, in particular when we set our priorities? I believe we have done this in one way or another. Madir or Bastian, would you like to just reflect on how that has worked?
Yes, so we have included this in setting our priorities. I think it partly turns up in the reporting numbers that we've used. We do have some knowledge of which sectors had high uptake of the G4 sector supplements and where the uptake was lower. So we have taken that into account.
And Kirsten just simply shared that that they are still using the G4 mining and metal sector supplement. I think it's not necessarily entirely fit for purpose. It probably requires a little bit of shoehorning for them to make it fit. But I know that there are some of these sector supplements that actually are still in use by reporters, which we can build off of. Robin, Leeson would like to ask a question. Robin?
Yes, thanks, Judy. I did have a question understanding the classification system that's used and the imperative to have something that's recognisable to all stakeholders. But I just wanted to ask a question about what are the risks or implications of not using the classification system that's used by investors, especially with the discussions we've had about working more closely with that community and with the ESG data needs, but particularly in light of who the main audiences are for the sector work, and perhaps some of the investor constituents might want to respond to that as well.
Can I take that first,
Thanks, Robin. I think this is a very technical question, isn't it? Because there's quite a lot to unpack in terms of the sector classification that's been subject to a lot of research by the Standards Division already. Madir, do you have a kind of quick answer? There might be a sort of longer term, deeper answer to it as well, but I'll leave it to you to decide how to do that.
Yes, thanks, Robin. It's a very good question. So I came from an organization where we were very comfortable with GICS and with some of the investment-based classifications. There are a few things about them. They're increasingly splintering. So we're seeing more and more investment institutions electing to have their own. And one of the reasons for this is because these are proprietary classifications and the licensing fees are quite high. So I think there are many different versions, and there are also beginning to be different models for how sectors are classified. So traditionally, they might be based on products, or they might be market-based, but now we're starting to see models that are being put together in different manners. Yes, please, Evan, go ahead. You know much more about this.
I was just going to say that the most prominent example right now that I'm running up against is the SASB sector standards, and they have gone in their own direction with defining some of those categorizations and not relying exclusively on GICS as well. So I think that it's an open question about whether there is a gold standard that we could defer to.
Exactly. It's getting to be an increasingly a lot of different, similar but different ways of naming things. But I think there is also an extent to which we realize that if you're following sustainability impacts and trying to describe sustainability impacts, that it's a very different thing from trying to describe, companies that you expect to behave in a similar manner in the market. So we really recognize that some of the proprietary investment-based systems weren't trying to do the same thing that we are in the GRI sector program.
And this is Bastian, maybe just to add to that, one of the basic assumptions that we're definitely handling for the classification is that we have to be able to reconcile that with the established ones. Whatever we put forward, in the end, we will always need to explain against the most commonly used ones to enable that integration into existing processes and systems. But right now, based on the evidence base and certainly also the different considerations that Madir has laid out, we feel that we should not continue the quest to identify the one gold standard that is established as a proprietary model by one group specifically.
Yeah, this is Dwight. Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yes, I recall earlier discussions that were fairly thorough in the first days of the GSSB. And I seem to recall preferring the United Nations system. However, I think it's probably much better to have our own. But my suggestion would be two things. One is every sector standard have sort of a description of sort of cross-referencing the various possible standards that might be contained in it. And as was suggested earlier in this meeting, I think all of that needs to be in the proposal that the board approves for each sector. So what it's called and what it would consist of based on the various other indexes.
Thank you very much, Dwight. And we're getting some support from Evan on the chat box as well. Both of this, the existing sector classifications were indeed not created to measure sustainability impact. And he agrees that we could and should map to others. I know that we could spend a long time talking about just the sector classification question because it is quite fraught and it's not straightforward. There isn't a simple decision to be made about this. Can I ask, just in favor of getting through our agenda today, can I ask whether there are any sort of real burning questions that people have at the moment about this overall proposal for the sector program? This is an evolving program that will unfold over quite a long period of time now. But do we have any kind of final burning questions that people have now? I am not seeing or hearing any. Is it possible then, do you think, for us to move on to the specific project proposal with respect to the mining and metals sector? Would that be all right?
Yes, thank you, Judy. I'm going to turn this over to Karen now.
Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. This is Karen Williams, the Senior Coordinator for the Sector Programme. It's good to meet you all today, or should I say hear from you all today. So first of all, we're going to look at the pilot project for mining, and we're going to look at the selection of mining and give a brief look at what we have discovered to be mining at a very high level. And then we'll take a look at the timeline for the pilot project, and then we'll move on to the next steps, and then we'll move on to your questions and discussion. So mining has been identified as a strong candidate for the pilot project, as mining supports all of the sectors by providing materials. Iron and steel are critical inputs for housing, transportation, infrastructure, and many other metals and minerals are considered to be critical raw materials for specific applications. We've taken a look at the GRI reports between 2014 and 17, and we've also looked at the global trade exports for 2017 to see where mining features, and in both cases it sits in the top 5, so it appears to be a priority area. There's also well-developed literature on the mining sector's impacts and its role in sustainable development, and due to its breadth and significance of the impacts on economies, the environment and society, we see it as being a priority. There's also increasing stakeholder pressure for the sector to reduce its negative impacts and to positively contribute to the SDGs. So we've taken a very high-level dive into mining, if you can have high-level and dive at the same time. So mining produces lots of different commodities, and it involves lots of different activities, and not all of them have the same sustainability story. And our aim in this piece of work is to capture the main sustainability issues across the mining sector. I've given you just a sample set of commodities that are come from the mining sector, which range from the obvious, such as coal and copper, but then may also feature things that are less obvious, such as aggregates, sand and gravel, which you might say are connected with the construction industry. And we expect to go over some of these elements with the subcommittee. So now moving on to the sector programme pilot timeline, and I'm aware that the font is very, very small for you all to see, so I'll just give you the sort of overview of the timeline. So I won't go into too much detail. So it will follow the due process, and I've identified the 4 main gates for the GSSB approval in green, with the first one commencing in January 2019. The main development phase will begin in May 2019, and then we are looking to have a standard finalised by the end of June 2019. 2020. Sorry, apologies. In terms of next steps, we are looking to engage the subcommittee to finalise the points that require clarification and share these with the board and stakeholder council and give feedback back to the GSSB for consideration. We will then revise the proposals and are looking for GSSB approval in January. And in February, there will be a call for nominations for the project working group. And that concludes the mining sector pilot. And I'll just move to see if there's any discussion or questions.
Thank you very much. So just to be clear for the GSSB, we do not need to approve or sign off on this proposed project description at the moment. We will have the opportunity to do that in January. So this is, for the moment, this is for information and for any immediate discussion that we might have. I think that there might be a couple of members who will need to leave in the next few minutes or might have limited access. The rest of our agenda today is really just an information discussion. So do we have any questions that members would like to ask at the moment?
This is Dwight. Just a quick comment, and it should be interpreted in light of what I said earlier. I think the UNDP list is very good to illustrate, but I think the proposal needs to make it clear that one of the outcomes of the group is to actually determine the impacts that would constitute the actual standard.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, Dwight. I don't know if the Standards Division wants to come back on that at all, or just sort of take that under advisement. Any other questions or comments that members would like to raise?
We're happy to take that under advisement. Thank you, Dwight.
Okay. We've got some support coming in the chat box from Kirsten, which is great to hear. Anyone else have any outstanding issues about this one? I'm not hearing any, so
Judy,
thank you very much to the...
This is Bastian. Just for the record, we want to establish quickly whether the GSB members today are supportive of us moving these items to the SC and board, GRI board, for their review. As part of the due process, we should get your okay to do that. Again, we will then consider the additional feedback, also additional feedback that you might have after this call. Feel free to send it to us. But formally, I think we need to have you okay to make that next step in terms of the due process.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Bastian. There is every opportunity to still adjust this proposal before we finalize it in January. But does anyone have any concerns about this being shared with the board and the stakeholder council for their review and feedback? Kirsten, you would like to raise your hand.
No concerns on sharing it. I just must admit that it was still not clear to me if there is one or two working groups we are talking about here.
So for the subcommittee for the GSSB, we are talking about one with the idea that we are refining the sector program description. There are a couple of issues that we want to talk through with the subcommittee before we present a full proposal to the GSSB, but importantly also over the next year that committee can accompany us on the implementation of the pilot. We believe that the first year of piloting this program will actually probably lead us to course correct a bit on specific aspects of the program, and so this will be the same group of people ideally representing the GSB into a subcommittee over the course of 2019. Then separate to this is a project working group with the pilot project where external experts will be invited, and that will come later next year, and there will be, as for other project working groups, also the opportunity for GSB members to be represented for that as a sponsor, although we have to look at scalability of that, certainly with more than one or two projects in parallel. We will run out probably of volunteers on the GSB side to be mirroring all these processes. But during the pilot, that will certainly be possible as well. So, Kirsten, if that was the question, whether there is a possibility to join as a GSB sponsor for the pilot project, that will be something we will be coming back to in early 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any concerns that anyone has that would prevent these two things from being forwarded to the Stakeholder Council and the board for their feedback and guidance before we take this up again in January? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the time that everyone has already put into this work, and we look forward greatly to getting this program up and running. Can we look very quickly now at the draft meeting dates for 2019? I think you will have already seen these coming across your inboxes. And we'd just like to make sure that everyone is aware of what the overall program for 2019 looks like for our meetings. We have 2 in-person meetings in Amsterdam scheduled, one in late March and one in late September. And in between, we have virtual meetings scheduled for February, early March, June, and November. I will note that the proposal that we have just been looking at for the pilot mining sector project proposes that there will be some GSSB sign-off that occurs in October next year. So, and I would just point out that there isn't a meeting scheduled of the GSSB in October. However, we have already flagged this internally to ensure that we plan the engagement with the GSSB around the progress that project has taken early enough and at a deep enough level to make sure that we can sign off appropriately at the right time. That will undoubtedly be the case for a number of different things that happen over the course of the year. And we will certainly put all of our endeavors to making sure that the things that get in front of you do get in front of you at the right time and in the right format to enable the proper review and discussion by the GSSB. But we want to do this in such a way that keeps the requirement for actual meeting time to a minimum as far as we possibly can. Is there anything, Bastian, from your side that you want to say about the program for next year? Or shall we just leave it at that?
No, I think you covered all the important aspects here. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you very much. Does anyone want to? I'll just make sure that I don't move off of that until we've made sure that nobody has a burning question about it. I haven't heard any. Okay, thank you. I will now move to close the public meeting and thank all of you for participating, and for anyone who may be listening in online, thank you for joining us. And we will reconvene according to our proposed schedule for 2019, we will reconvene our next public meeting on the 7th of February. Thank you very much to the Standards Division and to the GRI Secretariat for your assistance as well. Thank you.